Creamer Media's Engineering News and Mining Weekly is interviewing Bernard Swanepoel, the chairperson of Manganese Metal Company, MMC, together with Louis Nel, the CEO of MMC, a remarkable South African company that turns manganese waste into the world's purest manganese metal. MMC is located in Mbombela, Mpumalanga, and it's been described by South Africa's Perceptive Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies Organization as being, quote, a South African industrial jewel, unquote. And Tips believes that it could be much bigger than it is today. Engineering News and Mining Weekly has viewed this highly impressive, one-of-a-kind producer of manganese firsthand. It is the sole producer of manganese metal outside of China, which is a big feather in South Africa's cap. For the last 50 years, MMC has taken waste product of manganese mining in South Africa, the fines, and turned it into the world's highest 99.9% pure manganese metal using chemical processing large quantities of electricity. Now, MMC is growing in excitement about upcoming demand for the electric vehicle EV battery market for battery-grade manganese, high-purity manganese sulfate monohydrate. It is against this background that Mining Weekly will kick off this interview by putting this question. In what way is MMC aligning its plans to bring manganese sulfate, MnSO4, into the battery market sooner than expected?
Thank you, Martin, for that very comprehensive introduction and good summary of our business so far. Of course, the future is a continuation. We need to continue to produce the world's purest manganese metal and serve our current customers. However, some of our customers are taking us into this very exciting battery space, and we are following them, and we are expanding into this space. We've been in discussions with the IDC for some time about funding a ore-to-sulphate process. That 540 million rands will be spent in Mbombela as soon as the details have been finalized. That process, unfortunately, is a 3 to 5 year process, and it will continue. It is the long-term future of South African manganese ore into the battery space. We are ideally situated. However, like China did not wait for the world, and America and Europe is not waiting for South Africa, the battery space is developing super fast. We do not have to back a technology or a combination of minerals. We will be supplying manganese in the shape and form that the precursor manufacturers wanted to them as soon as possible. For us to do that, we have to dissolve some of our current metal, which is already 99.9% pure, dissolve it, and then in order to ship it to where it's needed, we recrystallize it and we ship manganese sulfate. Manganese sulfate is the form in which precursor manufacturers want manganese. They want manganese units, but they need it as a sulfate because it is as sulfates where they blend it with lithium, nickel, cobalt, and so on. So for us, this is a further incremental step in our already pure manganese metal, where we are working with metal. Now we convert it into effectively a salt. Very simple, proven. We have done the feasibility, and as a board in January, we approved 130 million rands for the first SATS pipeline. What we get for that is we get to convert 2,000 tons of metal into 6,000 tons of sulfate. But, and this is the fantastic thing for people who are wanting this, this happens in a matter of 18 to 20 months, not 5 years. So critically, we get the top quality product to the market when the market wants it. Now, obviously, one could assume that from then on, there would be subsequent steps. We could see why we would expand from 2,000 tons of metal to 8,000 tons. That means 24,000 tons of manganese sulfate, which is quite significant. And that buys the end users, but us, the time for our manganese-ore-to-sulphate project to also come on stream. So this is an additional faster stream to market.
And so you are already exporting to Japan, you export to the US, you export to Europe. Is it customers in there that will now receive the manganese sulfate?
There's a little bit of overlap. We are currently exporting into Japan metal, and some of our customers actually converted into sulfate. But this is really an additional customer base for us. This is following some of our customers, but also the new entrants. As you know, all the OEMs, the car manufacturers of the world, are trying to secure the supply of critical minerals. Critical minerals have got different definitions, but for the purpose of this, the minerals that are required in order to make the cars and to make the batteries, manganese is a key component. It brings strength, but it also is actually relatively cheap compared to some of the other minerals that goes into a battery. But as much as there's an abundance of supply of manganese ore, there is absolutely limited capacity of making pure manganese metal and manganese sulfate. Outside of China, it's us.
And what about the logistics of getting this to market?
That continues to be the normal challenge. We are fortunately well established. For 50 years, we have been shipping what you call the fines, the waste product from the mines in the Northern Cape, all the way to Mbombela. I say shipping, obviously, by rail and late by road because of Transnet's inability to do that. We then also have got well-established logistics to get it to the ports of Maputo and Durban and to the international market. So for us, this is not an additional new challenge. There's a cost associated with that, but that is a cost that every supplier in the world faces. We mine where the ore bodies are, we beneficiate where there's a competitive advantage, and we need to supply the product in the shape and form that the user wants it, where they want it. We certainly think in time, some of our facilities may be offshore, but you know what? Right now, for Mbombela, this is a phenomenal and exponential expansion. This is a South African story taking a big step forward now.
And tell us about the IDC involvement, because we've waited for this IDC to become involved in your projects. Is it now definite that they will back you?
I wish I could say yes. It's a definite, and it is happening tomorrow. It is a process. Any funding project is a process. In the case of our ore-to-metal, the other project, there's obviously well-established patented technology, but this will be the proof of concept. This will be the first plant that converts South African ore directly into sulfate. So we need to take bold but conservative steps, if I can use those two words together. It's bold because it's 500 million. It's conservative because it first demonstrates that our process can be scaled up to commercial scale. After that, we then would still have to have a crystallizer step. What we're basically doing now, Martin, is we are building the crystallizer first. We're dissolving metal, we crystallize it, and so we're just leapfrogging ourselves. In the meantime, the conversations with the IDC is proceeding. I always think we are within 3 months of conclusion, but I've been thinking that for the last 9 months.
And you know, if I came to your factory now, would I see a separate section where you have set up a new plant? The last time I got there were a lot of researchers working on this, but you were talking about establishing a plant. Is that now happening?
I think, as Bernard indicated with the crystallizer, we are leapfrogging our own ore-to-sulphate project. So the crystallizer, we have broken soil and we are busy with preparing the site for the crystallizer in the same location as where it would have been for the ore-to-sulphate project. We do need to make a little bit of extra land available. We are fortunate that we've got that to our disposal. So in essence, our sulfate project stays on the same footprint that you saw on our site. This is not a very big footprint that we actually need. It is relatively simple, and I think that lends itself to the speed of implementation and the build. Not a very big installation.
Just give me a bit more insight into the difference between the sulfate and a crystallizer plant.
Yeah, so crystallization is a form of purification in many instances, as well as a form of dewatering. So, of course, you alluded to transport, and sulfate only 32% manganese containing. So, of course, we don't want to be sending 60-odd% water to our customers. So crystallization is a process whereby we get rid of the water and create the product which we can ship. So in both our streams, we would need crystallization unless we establish on a site where precursors are being manufactured. So that's if we co-locate. Of course, in South Africa, no one's making precursors, so co-location, per definition, takes us to where the customers are. But the solution, so we start with metal, it's gone through our cellars, and we dissolve it again with sulfuric acid, and then we crystallize it. That's not the most efficient way of getting to the end result. But as Bernard alluded, the market at this stage, is desperate for refined manganese, and this is just a shorter route to the end goal. I think our flagship project still stays a project where we take ore and we go through a chemical process up to another liquor, which we then put through the same crystallizer and create manganese sulfate crystals. So end product exactly the same. It's just your starting point that differs.
Martin, if I can also just add, because obviously the OEMs are developing specs for the purity of the various minerals and metals, and it is evolving, but it's very stringent. Now, because we start with pure metal, we have got a huge advantage. It is just so simple. It is already pure. And our ore-to-sulphate process, which, as I've previously indicated, is developed by us and patented, it also gives us such a pure solution that, contrary to anybody else, we really need to crystallize purely as a drying out step. Our crystallizer will continue. It will even further purify, but we are already within the specs of most of the suppliers already. So that's a longer term significant cost advantage. We actually clean the manganese through processes, and then crystallization is part of packaging almost. It's dry out to pack. We've also experimented with the spray drying, and that works perfectly fine. That's how pure our metal is, or else metal in solution is. Longer term, that's going to be a cost differentiator between us and anybody else in the world, we believe.
And are you doing this ahead of everybody else, or other producers like the Chinese producers? Are they also taking this route?
Chinese producers are all making their manganese sulfate from ore. So our long-term project is then similar to Chinese. Our Japanese customers, which we've been supplying over the last 10 years, are doing exactly this, Martin. They are taking South African 999 manganese metal, dissolving it in sulfuric acid and converting that into manganese sulfate. So our customers are certainly taking the step, but our competitors are all doing this from ore.
And I got the impression, even when I visited you, that you were taking clean electricity rather seriously. It is quite electricity intensive. How are you doing with getting that hydropower from Lydenburg?
Yeah, I think that probably speaks to our 2,000 tons that we start with. We now are wheeling 7% of our annual energy requirement is being fed from 2 hydro plants. So that's up and running, which means that we can accredit 2,000 tons of metal that are produced purely with hydropower. So we can accredit the feed material to this new project as green material. And that, of course, speaks to the CO2 load of our sulfate. So I think that speaks to our first 2,000 tons. I think we are ready to announce very soon the signing of a large-scale PPA, which over the next 2 years would start feeding in more renewables into our production process. And that would allow us to scale this project with more green metal.
And price-wise, does it affect the price? Do you get a price premium if it's green, or do they just insist on it being green? And could you chat about prices a bit?
Yeah, I think that's a debate which I think most commodities are struggling with, is that your demand for green products and your ability of your end customer to actually pay for that benefit, still a bit of a disjoint in that. So I think having green product available is almost a non-negotiable getting into the market, but certainly doesn't change the pricing. I think we are very competitive if it comes to the greenness and the CO2 equivalent of our product compared to the Chinese competitors.
And will this always be smaller than your main metal production, or is this destined to be bigger? And what do they use this manganese metal that you produce, the 999, what does the world use it for?
Steel industry. So I think to answer your question, this will always be smaller than manganese going into the steel industry. International market for manganese metal is around about 1.2 million tons per annum. We make 28,000 tons, so about 2% of the world market. But the steel makers consume most of the manganese metal, as well as most of the manganese that is mined. So steel industry will always be much bigger. Anticipated volumes by 2030 for manganese sulfate outside of China, maybe 200,000 tons. So this only 20% of the eventual market for manganese units up to 2030. So always smaller than the overall market for manganese metal. In our case, I think we compete against around about 30 to 40 manganese metal makers in China. So I think there we stay small. In the case of manganese sulfate, there are only 11 Chinese producers and 1 European producer. So I think there is opportunity for us to play a much bigger role in that space going forward. So that could potentially mean that this becomes the core of our business over the next 10 to 20 years.
So our current business is constrained at producing 28,000 tons of metal a year. We could see that, say, up to 8,000 of those tons we could reposition to be dissolved for manganese sulfate. That will give you 24,000 tons of manganese sulfate. It's a fantastic first mover, quick solution. But if the market grows as exponentially as everybody forecasts, then we do need to bring our ore-to-sulphate process on stream, and that will be uncapped and unlimited. That could certainly overtake our current business in terms of sheer volumes, revenue in the longer term. So this is using our current footprint, our current base, our current product as a first-to-market advantage. But then we must, in parallel, establish the pathway to unlimited growth, because OEMs don't really want to commit to technologies of higher manganese if they can't see where the manganese comes from. I mean, American rules are becoming clearer by the day. And in the process of catching up with the world, Americans came together for once to agree on the IRA. And that piece of legislation created huge incentives. But of course, as the rules come out, those incentives says that certain minerals, including manganese, cannot be sourced from China. So what does it mean? It means the non-Chinese or the producers outside China, we have to get our ducks in a row. We have to convince OEMs that if you commit to manganese, we will commit to have the manganese there for you when you need it. This is the parallel sort of where the geopolitics play out to the endowment of South Africa, to the history of MMC. It's a unique position for us to step into and to take what happens in the rest of the world, interpret it and leverage it so that we put South Africa hopefully back on the map as at least a manganese beneficiator.
When do you expect the first crystallized product to reach your customers?
I will be bold and say January 2026, and then say, Louis, did you hear me? Can you deliver that? That is our current sort of timeline, and that certainly fits very nicely into what OEMs are looking for firm offtakes for. Obviously, in the meantime, there are numerous people who we have already sent 5 kilograms, 10 kilograms. We're in the process of getting our process and our product accredited with the significant players. So there's a long lead. There's not only building the plant. This is a simple process. So dissolving metal is a simple process, but we still need to go through various accreditation steps between us and our customers. The customers have to do that with the regulators for the batteries and so on. So all of those things are happening in parallel. So 18 months is a long time, and 18 months is an extremely short time. We will be in time for the market, which is the critical difference in this approach now.
And just to recap, which fetches the highest price, your traditional manganese metal or this new product?
No, we're not an integrated Chinese producer who can sell our own metal to ourselves at a discount. So obviously, what we are doing is we're starting with a metal with a see-through market price. We could have sold these tons into the market. So that's our starting point. and then we add a bit of additional cost in order to dissolve it. So this is to Louis' point. This is longer term, not the smartest way. We go too far. We purify to pure, and then we dissolve again. So longer term, there will definitely be a cost advantage in going straight from ore to manganese sulfate. This is a more costly step. We are still cost competitive, but this is an unnecessary costly process for longer term.
And finally, what in your views should be the biggest takeaway from this interview?
Well, it depends on the audience. If it's the government listening, and I know they're not, we actually don't need the government. It would have been nice to have a government and a framework and policies, but we don't. So this is going to happen anyway. I think if it's our customers listening, they know we are making the world's best quality manganese for the last 50 years, and we will always be true to that brand. That's not going to change. Current customers, future customers. And quite honestly, I think this is, in some ways, an example of if a business sticks to its core, stays focused, opportunities come around, we step into that. And certainly this has got the board, the owners, full support. And there's a world-class team in Nelspruit, a team that is winning the World Cup of manganese making, not every 4 years, every single day. This team is going to deliver this, absolutely no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, from my side, I think exciting for us after 50 years to venture in something which is not very new to us. I mean, we've been participating in the space for the last 10 years. But I think, Martin, South Africans are resilient, and as a proudly South African business, we've got all the ingredients to participate in something which is cutting edge and at the forefront of what is happening internationally in terms of development and R&D spend. We certainly don't have to stand back for the rest of the world.
That was Creamer Media's Engineering News and Mining Weekly, speaking to Bernard Swanepoel and Louis Nel of Manganese Metal Company of Mbombela.